The middle class doesn't end with a promotion. It ends with a decision. It's 6:14 p.m. on a Friday. You're sitting alone in your car in the office parking lot. The engine is still running and rain taps softly against the windshield. Your phone vibrates with a notification, direct deposit received. For exactly 17 seconds, you feel rich. You lean your seat back, your shoulders finally relax, and you think that maybe tonight you'll order takeout. Maybe this is the month you'll finally start saving, or maybe you'll finally feel ahead. Then the execution begins. Auto debit, rent, $1,800. Car payment, $450. Credit card, $220. Insurance, electricity, Wi-Fi, streaming subscriptions you forgot you even had. 30 seconds ago, your bank account looked like freedom. Now it looks like a forensic investigation. You stare at what's left, and it's somehow smaller than your motivation to wake up on Monday. The next morning at 8:45 a.m., you walk into the break room carrying a paper cup filled with coffee that somehow tastes both burnt and watered down. Your manager tells the same joke he's been telling since 2019, and everyone laughs, including you, not because it's funny, but because fitting in is cheaper than telling the truth. And in that moment, something quietly breaks. You don't have a terrible job, you have a predictable life. Every 2 weeks, someone deposits just enough money into your account to make sure you show up again 2 weeks later. Nobody chained you to your desk. They didn't have to. The middle-class trap is far more sophisticated. It gives you just enough comfort to stop you from panicking, but never enough freedom to stop asking for permission. Most people repeat this routine for 40 years. They call it responsibility. They call it adulthood, and some even call it success. But deep down, they're renting their lives one paycheck at a time. Today, that changes, because escaping the middle class isn't about working harder. It isn't about waiting for another promotion, and it definitely isn't about listening to another podcast called 10 Habits of Millionaires. It begins with something much more dangerous, a different way of thinking. The moment you stop acting like an employee and start thinking like someone who cannot be financially controlled, the shift happens. And somewhere in this story, you'll discover the exact moment that escape begins. Stage 1. The comfortable prison. The strange thing about the middle class is that almost nobody plans to stay there. When you were younger, you imagined freedom, not unlimited wealth, just enough. Enough to buy groceries without checking prices, enough to take a vacation without using a credit card, and enough to wake up on Monday without feeling like your life belonged to someone else. But life has a funny sense of humor. It doesn't steal your dreams overnight. It slowly negotiates with them. First, it convinces you to accept a stable job, then a nicer apartment, then a car payment, and then furniture financed over 36 months because it's only $89 a month. Monthly, monthly, monthly. Funny how everything in the middle-class world is sold by the month. Your apartment, your car, your phone, your subscriptions, even your happiness arrives every 2 weeks. You don't actually own very much. You simply rent a better version of survival. That's what makes the trap so effective. Real prisons have bars. This one has automatic deposits. Real prisons remove your choices. This one lets you believe you still have them. Monday through Friday, you sell time. Saturday, you recover. Sunday, you prepare to sell more time. Then someone asks, "How was your weekend?" And everyone gives the same answer. Too short. Of course it was. You spent 5 days earning it. The system never asks you to love your job. It only asks you not to hate it enough to leave. That's a much easier deal. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation. Humans are incredibly good at adapting. The raise that once felt life-changing eventually feels normal. The bigger apartment becomes ordinary, the newer car becomes invisible, and your happiness resets, but your expenses don't. Every improvement quietly raises the amount of money required just to feel average again. That's why someone earning $50,000 dreams about making $100,000, and someone making $100,000 secretly believes $200,000 will finally solve everything. The finish line keeps moving, not because money is evil,
but because your brain is designed to normalize success. The middle class isn't defined by income, it's defined by dependence. If missing one paycheck creates panic, you don't own your lifestyle owns you. And that's the first realization every financially free person eventually has. The goal was never a bigger paycheck. The goal was to build a life that no longer depended on one. Because the day you stop relying on a salary is the day your employer loses the only leverage they ever had. And once you see that, it's impossible to unsee it. The prison door doesn't open yet, but for the first time, you notice the key has been in your pocket all along.
Stage 2. The salary illusion. The following Monday, you decide something has to change. Not your habits, but your income. Because that's what everyone tells you. Get a better job, negotiate your salary, work harder, hustle more. So you do. Months pass, you stay late, you answer emails on weekends, and you volunteer for projects nobody else wants. Eventually, it works. Your manager calls you into the office. Congratulations, you've been promoted. Your salary jumps from $68,000 to $82,000. For the first time in years, you feel like you're finally winning. You celebrate with dinner at a nicer restaurant, a weekend getaway, maybe even a new watch. You've earned it, haven't you? Then something interesting happens, not to your income, but to your expectations. The apartment you've always wanted suddenly feels reasonable. The car you've been driving suddenly feels old. And your phone still works, but somehow it feels outdated. Nobody forces you to upgrade. You convince yourself. Because the human brain has a dangerous habit. It doesn't compare your life to your past. It compares it to everyone around you. Your coworker buys a Tesla, your college friend posts vacation photos from Italy, and someone your age just bought a house. Social media doesn't inspire you. It quietly redefines what normal looks like. And every new version of normal costs money. Soon your higher salary has disappeared, not because you wasted it, but because your lifestyle expanded to absorb it. The middle class has a strange relationship with raises. Every raise feels like freedom until it becomes another monthly payment. The bigger paycheck doesn't remove pressure. It simply finances a more expensive version of the same life. You tell yourself, I can't quit now. I've got responsibilities. Maybe next year. Listen carefully. Those aren't financial problems. They're psychological contracts. Because the moment your lifestyle becomes too expensive to leave, your paycheck stops being income and becomes permission to keep repeating yesterday. The wealthy eventually discover something the middle class rarely does. A salary is excellent for paying bills, but it's terrible at creating freedom. Because salaries stop the moment you do, but assets don't. That's why two people earning exactly the same amount can end up living completely different lives. One spends every extra dollar improving appearances, while the other quietly buys things that continue paying long after the paycheck arrives. Same income, different psychology, different future. And that's when you ask a question you've never asked before, not how do I make more money, but how do I stop needing my paycheck? That single question changes everything. Stage 3. The identity shift. The answer doesn't arrive dramatically. There are no fireworks, no lottery ticket, and no billionaire mentor appears at your front door. Instead, it begins with something almost laughably small, your first investment of a few $100s, maybe $1,000. You check the app every few hours. The market goes down. You lose $12, and now you suddenly become an economist. The next day, it goes back up. You gain $18, and now you're convinced you're Warren Buffett. A week later, you realize something profound. The money moved while you were asleep. Nobody asked you to clock in, nobody approved vacation days, and nobody cared whether you were sitting in traffic. For the first time in your life, a tiny piece of your income didn't come from your time, it came from ownership. The amount doesn't matter, but the idea does, because your brain has just witnessed a completely different set of rules. You stop looking at money as something you spend and start looking at it as something that can be hired. Every dollar becomes a tiny employee. Some employees work harder than others, some fail, and some surprise you. But unlike human employees, none of them complain about Mondays.
That's when your behavior begins to change. You buy fewer things, not because you're becoming cheap, but because every unnecessary purchase has a hidden cost. It delays hiring another financial employee. Your friends think you become boring. You stop upgrading everything, and you stop chasing status. Ironically, that's when your confidence grows, because status impresses strangers, but ownership creates freedom. Years pass, and your portfolio becomes larger. The dividends are still small, but they're real. One month, your investments pay your internet bill. Another month, they cover groceries. It isn't life-changing yet, but psychologically, everything has changed. Because once you've experienced money working harder than you, it's impossible to return to believing a paycheck is the only path forward. Employees count the days until payday, while investors count the years until independence. You're no longer trying to escape work, you're trying to escape dependence, and those are two completely different goals. The middle class spends decades asking, "How much do I earn?" while the wealthy ask, "How many assets are working while I sleep?" From that moment on, your calendar no longer controls your future. Your assets do.
Stage 4. Money starts working. 5 years pass, not overnight, but because you stopped chasing shortcuts. You bought assets again and again and again. At first, nothing looked different. You still drove to work, you still packed lunch, and you still ignored the newest iPhone. People assumed nothing had changed, and they were right on the outside. But inside, everything had changed. You no longer measured success by your salary. You measured it by one question. How many days could I live if my paycheck disappeared tomorrow? That question became your scoreboard. The first answer was 3 days, then 2 weeks, then 3 months, and eventually an entire year. Fear began disappearing, not because life became easier, but because options became larger. You noticed something strange. Your coworkers became obsessed with promotions, while you became obsessed with ownership. They celebrated raises, while you celebrated another dividend. They asked, "What car are you buying next?" while you asked, "What asset is buying my next car?" Same world, different operating system. One afternoon, your phone buzzes with another dividend payment of $38. It isn't exciting, but it isn't about the amount. It's about the evidence. Someone, somewhere, bought a product from a company you partially own while you were eating lunch. Money had quietly crossed the country looking for you, without an interview, without overtime, and without asking permission from your manager. That's when you realize that assets don't sleep, employees do. And every asset you own is a tiny machine working 24 hours a day, trying to make sure you won't have to. You stop asking, "Can I afford this?" and start asking, "Will this purchase delay my freedom?" That single question quietly changes every decision you make. Stage 5. The escape. It's another Friday, 6:14 p.m., almost the exact same time, with almost the exact same rain. You park in the same parking lot, and your phone vibrates. Direct deposit received. This time, you don't rush to check it, because your life no longer resets every payday. Your investments paid you on Tuesday, your rental income arrived yesterday, and your index funds kept growing while you were asleep. The paycheck still matters, but it just doesn't own you anymore. That's the difference. You still go to work, but now it's a choice, not a survival requirement. Your manager asks if you can stay late, and for the first time you actually think about the answer, not because you're rude, but because you're free. Freedom sounds much quieter than people imagine. It isn't private jets, designer watches, or posting motivational quotes from a beach. Freedom is sitting in a meeting knowing you could walk away and still pay every bill. That changes the way you speak, the way you negotiate, and the way you live. Because nobody can control someone who no longer depends on permission. The middle class believes wealth is about buying expensive things. The wealthy discover it's about buying back your own time. Remember that Friday evening when your paycheck arrived and disappeared before you even left the parking lot? Back then, you thought your biggest problem was money, but it wasn't. It was dependence. You believed one more promotion would save you,
one bigger paycheck, or one better year. But freedom was never hiding inside your next salary. It was hiding inside every decision you made after receiving it. The middle class isn't defined by a number, it's defined by a belief. The belief that your time must always be exchanged for money, that security comes from a company, and that someone else controls whether you can pay your bills next month. The day you questioned those beliefs, the escape had already begun. Because the first asset you bought didn't just change your bank account, it changed your identity. You stopped working only for money, and you started building something that could work for you. Years later, people will look at your life and call you lucky. They'll see the investments, the freedom, and the confidence, but they'll never see the thousands of ordinary decisions that built it. The nights you didn't spend, the raises you didn't inflate away, and the assets you bought instead of applause. Success rarely arrives with fireworks. Most of the time, it arrives quietly, one investment, one habit, and one decision at a time. And maybe the middle class was never a place. Maybe it was simply a story that millions of people inherit and very few ever question. The moment you stopped believing that story was the moment you escaped.